Hello and welcome to Step Through History. This is a belter of a story. It's about King Edwin, Coifi and the Anglo-Saxon conversion to Christianity. If you enjoy it, please like, please subscribe, and I'll be asking for comments at the end. Well, let's get on with it, shall we? Enjoy. In the year 626, the destruction of Woden's temple in Goodmanham, East Riding of Yorkshire, believed to be on this very spot that I stand now, marks a significant moment in the Anglo-Saxon conversion to Christianity. But the adoption of a new faith is far less straightforward, far less linear than I first realised. In fact, it's quite the roller coaster. But before I walk in the footsteps of Edwin, Paulinus and Coifi, we need to take a trip to a slave market in Rome. Believed to have occurred during the 6th century, a chance meeting between Gregory and some child slaves led to the church in Rome making a concerted effort to bring Christianity to the Angles in Deira. Walking past the slaves, Gregory saw uncommon beauty and symmetry of form within their faces. Gregory inquired as to who they were. "Angles," they replied. "You should be angels," exclaimed Gregory in ecstasy. The slaves mentioned they were from Deira, and that their king was called Ela. This greatly pleased Gregory, as he returned with Alleluia, and proclaimed that the praise of the true God shall henceforth be re-echoed in their own land. Gregory never did get a chance to lead a mission to Deira. Shortly after this chance meeting, he became Pope Gregory, and so St. Augustine in his stead. The Pope had a plan of action to convert the pagan masses. One of the strategies employed would be to convert existing religious sites into Christian churches by merely destroying the idols and consecrating the altars. I think it's important at this stage to discuss statues or idols and the two different ways these faiths practice. You see, the Germanic pagan faith loved their statues, they loved their idols. As far as they were concerned, their gods weren't invisible, they were very much alive and present in this world. Now that's a stark contrast to the Christian faith at this time. The Christians at this point worshipped a man who was seemingly dead, nailed to a cross, and the church had no visible image of the man that they worshipped. Obviously this is a policy that would change within the Christian faith, but it hasn't yet. So it's going to take a very clever individual to convince the Anglo-Saxons to put their faith into someone who was seemingly dead. Now, hold on to that thought, it's pertinent later, much later. All this grand talk of Christianising the land, we're going to have to put a lid on it a bit, not get carried away, because at the beginning of the 7th century, Augustine's mission has only just begun. He began in the Kingdom of Kent. At first glance, Kent was a kingdom like any other in the Anglo-Saxon world, but things aren't quite so straightforward though. If we dig a little deeper, I think we find these differences may have made Kent a preferable starting point to the mission over the aforementioned Angels of Deira. Taking its name from the previous occupants, the Cantiarchi, the population may have heavily consisted of Jutes from Jutland in modern-day Denmark, along with a reasonable representation from the Franks. Combine this with the fact it was just a short crossing to the continent. Kent was culturally inspired, influenced and engaged with the continental Christian Germanic world in a way the other kingdoms just weren't. The Germanic world at this point was filling the vacuum left by a departed Western Roman Empire. It was a great aspiration to be the successor to Rome. Across Europe, groups like the Visigoths, Lombards, Franks and Burgundians had written in Latin codified laws for their respective kingdoms. Kent was the first of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms to follow suit, although they do things differently of course, so they wrote it in their own language and not Latin. Another unusual tradition was to divide their kingdom into lathes centred around a manor or villa. Very Roman in style. The other kingdoms would use hundreds, a system dividing the land by area, 100 hides or for 100 people, 100 weapons, something like that. Either way, it doesn't matter. Kent dared to be different, and was not just adaptable, but actively seeked change through its aspirational links to other worlds and ways of life. The King of Kent on Augustine's arrival was Ethelbert, a pagan ruler of a pagan land. Change was already afoot. He married a Christian, Bertha of Paris, from the illustrious Frankish Merovingian dynasty. Bertha was permitted to practice her faith freely, and had her own confessor accompany her to a new home. In the year 597, less than 3 years after Augustine's arrival, he had convinced King Ethelbert to convert to Christianity, and was baptised into his new faith. Spurred on by the mission's initial success, Pope Gregory sent a group to support Augustine's work, one of which was an Italian monk named Paulinus, who we will be seeing more of later. Pope Gregory's mission is going well, and getting better, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. We will leave the Kingdom of Kent behind us, because right now it's the turn of the 7th century, and the Anglo-Saxon world is staunchly pagan, and the Angles, or Angels of Deira, have had their wings clipped. Aelle, the king of Deira, had died in 604, and his land was conquered by Ethelfrith, ruler of the kingdom of Bernicia, and his son-in-law. Ouch. Aelle's son and heir, named Edwin, was driven into exile, staying at the court of Redwald, the powerful king of East Anglia, and was to survive or escape at least one assassination attempt. Ethelfrith now controlled 2 kingdoms, which form a proto-Northumbria, and wasted no time expanding his borders and authority with decisive victories over his Christian neighbours, the Dalriada in the northwest and Reged in the west. Bede describes Ethelfrith as a man most desirous of glory and glory-eager, a term used in Anglo-Saxon epics describing semi-mythical hero kings of old. For a comparison, as Kent is making its transition to Christianity, Ethelfrith's army slaughtered some 1,200, or 200 depending on the source, unarmed monks praying for victory before routing the army of Strathclyde at the Battle of Chester in 614. At this point in proceedings, Edwin has a mountain to climb, with no land to call his own and an ever more powerful Northumbria. And that's before we burden him with the task of spearheading a conversion for a distant religion he does not adhere to. Edwin was not a Christian, but his time living in exile, living in Christian courts, exposed him to this new religion. As a result, we cannot assume he was ignorant of it. East Anglia, through its friendship with Kent, took a step towards converting. What appears to be a major coup for Roman Catholicism may have been nothing more than a gesture or political posturing. It was not uncommon for populations transitioning between religions to have a foot in both camps, just in case, a sort of insurance policy for the afterlife. Redwald allowed both pagan and Christian worship to be practiced throughout East Anglia, even sanctioning pagan and Christian altars in the same temple. It has a whiff of Pope Gregory about this, don't you think? Bede will record that Redwald was absolutely a Christian, and I'm far from convinced. The truth was probably more complicated than that. The conversion, as we're finding out, was not a binary moment like Caesar crossing the Rubicon. Geoffrey of Monmouth states that he spent time with Cadwallon, the future king of Gwynedd, as a foster brother, living in the Christian courts of North Wales as well as with the Bretons. Geoffrey believes they developed a bitter rivalry, one which, like everything else in this story, will come back round again. In 616, Ethelbert of Kent dies. His son took the kingdom back into paganism, taking full advantage of the practice to marry his widowed mother-in-law. I told you it wasn't going to be straightforward. It's fair to say at this point in the story that Christianity has merely been dabbled with at this point. Its standing was somewhat tenuous. It's hard to imagine that landless pagan Edwin was to be the one to blow the bloody doors off for the church in Rome. 1 year later, that was to change. In 617, Redwald of East Anglia marched against Ethelfrith of Northumbria for Edwin's claim on the kingdom. The two sides met at the Battle of the River Idle. Ethelfrith was slain, and according to the Anglo-Saxon chronicles, it was the mighty Redwald himself that did it. Edwin was now king of Northumbria, which combined his father's kingdom of Deira with that of Bernicia further north. The children of Ethelfrith, including Oswald and Oswy, would have to escape and live in exile. I won't be covering them in this story, but I will do very soon, and the consequences of them being brought up at the Christian site of Iona in the Hebrides provides the sequel to this tale. Edwin began his reign in a way that is reminiscent of his predecessor, Ethelfrith. He expanded the pagan Northumbria, subduing the Britons of Elmet around modern-day West Yorkshire and cutting off the Britons of Alt Clwyd with those of Wales. If this is a story about the Anglo-Saxon conversion to Christianity, then where is the Christianity? It feels like the mission, which started by Gregory in the marketplace in Rome, has not just taken a major step back, but turned and fled. And that is exactly what is happening in that first of the Christian kingdoms of Kent. As mentioned earlier, Ethelbert had died and his heir had reverted to paganism. As a result, 2 of the Roman missionaries sent by Pope Gregory fled to the continent, leaving only Laurentius, the Archbishop of Kent. He too had planned to cross the English Channel, but according to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, he was visited in the night by the Apostle Peter. It may have been that desperate times seek desperate measures, as Peter decided to forego a motivational speech and went straight to beating him violently for considering attempting to leave his flock. Peter charged Laurentius with converting and baptising the new King of Kent. Laurentius was successful. Kent was once again a fledgling Christian island in a sea of paganism. At this stage, around the year 619, the Christian mission must have felt like an exhausting and rather fruitless task. But if they have nothing else, they at least can be persistent, and they could view this situation as a reset, sort of do-over if you will. So once again, starting in Kent, let's have round 2. In the year 625, Edwin marries Ethel Berger, sister to the King of Kent. She was a Christian and was able to continue practicing her faith freely. Furthermore, like her mother, Bertha of Paris, she was joined by a confessor. In this instance, it was an Italian monk named Paulinus. Edwin was now a mighty king of a powerful Northumbria, and he did it all as a pagan. Although he doesn't seem particularly swayed at this moment, he doesn't appear to have any animosity towards it either. Christianity was certainly tolerated, even so far as Paulinus being able to preach across his country. A quick look at a map of England would show a clear line of division in the year 625. On one side we have re-Christianised Kent and Christian-tolerant Northumbria and East Anglia. On the other side sits pagan Wessex and Mercia. The events that unfold over the next couple of years highlight this division beautifully. The story now moves to the court of the shadowy King of Wessex, Cynegils. Concerned about Northumbria's rise and the power of Edwin, Cynegils cedes the northern half of his kingdom to his son Quickhelm to create a buffer state between the heart of his kingdom and the man he perceives as a threat. Wessex may not have had the military capabilities to meet the Northumbrians in battle. In that case, it would be a foolish king to rely on such methods, which is why a messenger named Eomer was dispatched from Wessex to Edwin's royal court. Was diplomacy the way forward? Eomer was received in the great hall and made his way to the king. The messenger turned assassin and drew a blade lunging at Edwin. A quick-thinking Then named Lilla hurled himself forward to take the blow before the blade reached its target. According to Bede, the wretch struck home so fiercely that he wounded the king through his retainer's body. Eomer was said to have fought so hard that he slew another before being finally dispatched by Edwin's guards. Edwin, lucky to have survived, thanked his gods, displayed as statues in his place of worship. Paulinus suggested it was his prayers to the Christian god that saved his life, and Edwin decided to put this to the test. He vowed to be baptised if the Christian god gave him victory over the West Saxons in revenge for the attempt on his life. It wasn't the only event to take place that evening. Edwin's wife, Ethel Berger of Kent, gave birth to a daughter named Enflede. Edwin further agreed to his daughter to be baptised and instructed 11 members of his household to convert also. Although the details of what happened next are scant, they are important nonetheless. Edwin was said to have raised a levy and marched on Wessex, who were supported by their ally Mercia. He was probably heavily outnumbered, despite what appears to be a rash and impetuous adventure driven by anger and revenge. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicles reports that Northumbria struck down 5 kings and killed many people. The armies of Wessex and Mercia would return to their respective homes to count their losses, lick their wounds, and keep their heads down for a while. Edwin had subdued the Anglo-Saxon world. With this bit of breathing space, he could, for now at least, focus on domestic affairs, and at the top of his list would have been his agreement with Paulinus to convert. Edwin was no doubt such a successful military man that it's too easy to negate his other potential skills. He has forged and maintained alliances, influenced his neighbours, and been unwavering, calculated and swift in the defence of his realm. And when confronted with alternate ideas and beliefs, he has shown curiosity, warmth and adaptability. Was he perhaps a thoughtful and conscientious man, as well as a brilliant military commander? He knew his conversion to Christianity would receive objections. If he was only a bull-headed commander with just one trick up his sleeve to strong-arm his opposition into submission, then he probably had the standing to just plough ahead with it anyway. If there were any objections, they could be sorted on the battlefield, in a civil war. I'm just thinking aloud at the moment, and whatever his reasoning, Edwin held a meeting with his witan, or wise men, on his return from Wessex.
In 626, King Edwin held a meeting with his witan, his wise men, which is believed to have taken place right here where I am now, in Lounsborough. It's just a few miles along the edge of the wolds from Goodmanham. Now in attendance was Paulinus and the high priest of Woden's temple in Goodmanham, Coifi. Now, according to one source, which, like all of Coifi's information, is not contemporary, but it described him as a sort of character, a bit of a loon maybe, the type of person you tell your kids, look, over there in those woods is Coifi with his statues. Now, if you leave him be, he's happy enough and he won't bother you. So you know what, you go off and play over there, and never the twain shall meet. It's probably not true, but who knows? Mystery man, isn't he?
When there, Edwin asked each member of the witan what they thought about the doctrines being preached by Paulinus. Coifi, the king's high priest, spoke up on the matter. He was concerned that his lifetime of worship had amounted to no holy interventions, and so clearly their gods had no power. Another counsellor furthered this thought, questioning the fact that if their gods had no power in life, what of the afterlife? He likened life to the brief flight of a sparrow through a comfortable room, saying, "This it seems to me, O my king, that the life of man on earth, in comparison with the life unknown to us, is just as if you were sitting at the table with your ealdorman in wintertide, when the fire was kindled and your hall made warm, while it rained and snowed outside. And then came a sparrow, and quickly flew through the hall, coming in by one door, and passing out the other." During the time that he is passing through the hall, he is safe from the winter storm, but it is only for the twinkling of an eye, and in the shortest period of time, he passes from winter to winter. So it seems the life of man. It is ours for a little while, but what goes before it, and what goes after, we know not. Therefore, if this teaching makes anything clearer and more certain, it is meet that we should follow it. It seems Paulinus, through his faith, can provide them with more answers about what happens in the unknown period before and after life. And this resonated with Coifi, who would proclaim, "I can see clearly that what we have been worshipping is but naught, for more earnestly I have sought the truth through our worship, the less I have found it. Therefore, O king, I now advise that we speedily destroy and burn with fire the altars which we hallowed without any benefit."
Edwin and his witan were convinced and converted. Wasting no time, Coifi asked for permission to be the first one to cast down the idols within the temple. Edwin agreed and gave him a stallion and a spear for the task. With his retinue of men, Coifi rushed over the wolds the few miles to Goodmanham. Just to give you a little idea about how significant this moment was, Coifi as a pagan priest should have only ridden a mare, not a stallion. So this is a real act of rebellion. He's throwing out his old ways, maybe in a very zealot way, trying to convince people like Paulinus, look, I'm in, I'm with you. Upon his arrival, he charged headlong at the temple and cast his spear with such violence and ferocity that it struck an idol and fixed firmly in its place. Onlookers expected the god's vengeance to rain down on Coifi, but nothing happened. And this just proved it. The gods were nothing but lumps of wood and stone. With that, the temple was pulled down with much excitement and zeal, and the ground, now littered with the remnants of their former religion, was set on fire.
Following these events, Edwin had a wooden church built in York dedicated to St. Peter, and Paulinus was granted the archbishopric of the northern provinces by papal appointment. The seeds of Christianity had been scattered before in this story, but I think this is the first time they have maybe taken root, like the foundations of St. Peter being laid in York. It kind of works as a metaphor also. As a side note, all of this strikes me as a copy and paste of Roman ways and land demarcations. In these early days, the Anglo-Saxons had yet to stamp their own mark on Christianity. In a time we often separate from the days of the Roman Empire, the Germanic world across Europe strives to make Roman ways the central pillars which hold up their kingdom, from copying the fashion of the court of the Eastern Roman Empire in Constantinople, to writing codified laws for the kingdoms, and most strongly of all, to be connected to Rome through the Catholic Church. The latter was on display on Easter Day in the year 627, when Edwin was baptised in York. Legend has it that there was such enthusiasm for conversion within Northumbria that Paulinus was obliged to baptise large crowds in rivers, the River Swale being a notable one, but there were others supposedly. This is seen as a major coup for Christianity, and it may not be inaccurate. It certainly would be efficient, but I doubt it's the whole truth.
In this story I've used terms like pagan Northumbria, and this really is just referring to the ruling class. It's helped maintain a sort of focus and a simplicity for the sake of the tale. But Britons, Christian Britons that is, well, they still formed a percentage of the population. Okay, so they were fewer in number, and they're standing in the upper echelons of society. They probably had none, but they were here.
But it was probably these people taking a dip in the Swale, relieved they no longer had to practice their faith in secret, and maybe hopeful and excited about what was to come. And why shouldn't there be? After such a rollercoaster ride, U-turns and resets, doesn't it feel like genuine progress has been made? At first glance, the evidence suggests that this may be the case. Paulinus was said to have worked tirelessly converting Northumbria, and just like York, he visited Lindsey, around modern-day Lincoln, helping to build the first church. This was no temporary measure either, it was built in stone from the off.
And this story should end there, with Christianity set in stone. But I did say this wasn't going to be a linear tale, and it's all about to come crashing down.
In the years following 627, Northumbria is at peace. Internally, at least, it seems that Edwin may have changed religion, but religion may not have changed him. For his next target was a Christian kingdom.
Gwynedd, ruled over by Edwin's rival and former foster brother, Cadwallon, would not pay homage to Northumbria.
Subduing the Anglo-Saxon world was not enough for Edwin, and he embarked on a campaign against this rebel king. He began with naval expeditions to the Isle of Man and Anglesey, bringing them both to heel. Edwin then turned to Gwynedd, and according to the Welsh Chronicle, in 629 he besieged Cadwallon on the Isle of something unpronounceable because I can't speak Welsh. My apologies.
It sounds like a decisive victory. Cadwallon was exiled to Ireland, and Edwin installed a puppet ruler, one who would pay homage to Northumbria.
Edwin had now received under all his dominion all the borders of Britain that were provinces of the English or of the Briton. At the start of this story it was a tale of Woden or Jesus. As that variable has been removed, it appears that very little changes. Was it as big a factor in conflict as we first imagine? Religion appears to be just one of the weapons in the arsenal of a king of this era, along with greed, ambition, birthright and rivalry. In fact, as the next turn of events unfolds, it almost appears irrelevant, as an unlikely alliance builds. I did promise a downfall. Although Edwin seems to be unstoppable, the year 630 would provide the first little wobble. as Redwald's Christian successor in East Anglia had been murdered to be replaced with a pagan. Over the water in Ireland, Cadwallon plots his revenge, driven by bitterness and hatred. He marries the sister of Penda, the king of Mercia, forming an alliance between Christian and pagan. A lot of you will know these characters already, but for those that don't, you may be forgiven for not rating Cadwallon too highly at this point, and Penda is a new, brief character of unknown quantity. But remember, Edwin was once the unknown quantity also, with seemingly little hope, so don't write them off. Cadwallon would return from Ireland and with his ally Mercia raised a rebellion against Northumbrian dominance. The allied army marched north from Mercia. Edwin, in defence of the realm, mustered an army and marched to meet his long-standing rival. In the middle of October, in the year 633, the two sides met at a place believed to be Hatfield Chase. A bloody and dreadful conflict ensued. Edwin's army was routed. The king, along with his son and heir Osfrith, were killed. Penda and Cadwallon rampaged through the kingdom. No one was spared from the mass slaughter. Men, women and children were put to the sword. It was as if he wanted to wipe out every last vestige of the Angles in Northumbria. Little to do with religion, just a good old-fashioned tale of the ebb and flow of power, the never-ending cycle of the oppressed becoming the oppressor. Northumbria, for now at least, would fragment, and for the first time in a while be under the yoke of a non-Northumbrian ruler. Paulinus, fearing the indiscriminate death and destruction, fled with Edwin's widow, Ethel Berger, to Kent, where they first entered the story. And that seems quite fitting, because for the third time we have landed right back to where we started. Kent once again stands as a lone Christian kingdom, but just like this story has shown, and in the words of Boethius, it's my belief that history is a wheel. Inconsistency is my very essence. Rise upon my spokes if you like, but don't complain when you're cast back down into the depths. Good times pass away, but then so do the bad. Mutability is our tragedy, but it's also our hope. The worst of times, like the best, are always passing away. It will all come round again, and I'll leave it with this. Just like Edwin before, hope lies in the exiled sons of the former king of Northumbria. They have no land, they have no hope, but we've been here before, haven't we?
Well, thank you for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. Now, the last time I did this video, found out that Coifi was known. He might not be known very well round here, let alone a bit further away, but he was known in the world. It seems to be southern United States and South America. So if you're coming to this video because of the word Coifi in the title, please let me know how you know him. Is he still spoken about? Where do you know him from? I'd be fascinated to know. But in the meantime, I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you like, you subscribe. Please leave a comment. And I'm just going to sit here and have a toast to Coifi and Woden's temple. Long gone, but not forgotten. Okay, until next time.